It's officially 11 a.m. Central Time, so let's kick this thing off. Thanks so much for all of you making the time to attend. We think that this webinar on how to shift your fleet maintenance from reactive to proactive will provide you with a lot of actionable information that you should be able to use to help figure out how to service your assets better. Before we get started, I want to give you a quick overview of everything that we're sharing with you today. And since fleet maintenance processes vary from fleet to fleet, we're going to start off by walking through some of the common ways that fleets are dealing with maintenance today and give you a chance to see where your fleet fits into that picture. And from there, we'll share some of our tips on how you can be more proactive in your fleet maintenance. And then we want to talk through some of the technologies that are available to fleet managers to help you stay proactive in your fleet maintenance. Before I hand this off to Alex, I'd like to briefly introduce ourselves. So, both Alex and I are with Fleetio, a software that helps organizations track, analyze, and improve their fleet maintenance and operations. Fleetio has been in the game since 2012, and today, thousands of organizations use it to manage maintenance for their vehicle, equipment, parts, drivers, and more. And to go a bit deeper into the fleets that we support, you can see the logos of some of our most recognizable customers on this slide. Our customers represent a wide variety of industries and operate across more than 75 countries. At the end of the day, while these businesses operate in completely different spaces, they all handle their fleet maintenance needs with Fleetio. And then, as I said, our names are Zach and Alex. That's me that you see there on the left. My name is Zach Searcy, and I'm the content manager here at Fleetio. And Alex Borg, one of our content specialists, will be leading our webinar presentation for y'all today. And with that, Alex, I'll hand things over to you.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Borg. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your very busy days to attend this webinar. We've got a lot to cover today and not a ton of time to go over things, so I'll just jump right into it. To begin, let's establish what reactive and proactive mean in the context of fleet maintenance, just so we're all on the same page. So when a fleet is reactive, their technicians spend most of their days repairing out-of-commission vehicles and equipment. So more often than not, the bulk of their time is spent jumping from one urgently needed repair to the next. And as we'll cover in just a bit, this approach to fleet maintenance can be pretty chaotic at times. On the other hand, when a fleet is proactive, their technicians are mostly focused on preventative maintenance, or PM, as it's commonly abbreviated in our industry. In other words, instead of frantically working to return broken down assets back to operational status, technicians at proactive fleets primarily spend their time keeping their assets in tip-top shape. Because PM is structured around quantifiable factors, think stuff like miles traveled or hours operated or just time in general, service tasks can be assigned far in advance with this approach. Proactive fleets create maintenance schedules that provide structure for their technicians, letting them know what tasks they'll need to perform well ahead of when those tasks are actually due. So in a nutshell, if a fleet's unplanned downtime far exceeds its planned downtime, that fleet is reacting to its maintenance needs. And vice versa, if a fleet's planned downtime is greater than its unplanned downtime, it's safe to label that fleet as proactive. Now, based on my explanation just now, you might be wondering why a fleet would ever choose to be reactive in the first place. Working off predictable schedules is obviously preferable to the madness of scrambling from one desperately needed repair to the next. So why do some fleets deliberately forego the proactive approach? Well, basically, these fleets tend to favor kicking their costs down the road over actual long-term savings. Reactive fleets commonly run their vehicles and equipment to the point of failure with minimal, or in some cases, even zero maintenance performed before those assets break down completely. While this approach does temporarily minimize planned downtime and maintenance costs, I'm sure all of you know that this approach is the opposite of cost-effective over the long run. So let's look at some examples that really showcase how putting off maintenance is ultimately the more expensive approach to fleet maintenance. According to AAA, most repair shops charge about $40 for a standard oil change. Just to keep things simple, let's assume that $40 cost is roughly equivalent to what it would cost the fleet to handle that maintenance in-house to perform that work themselves. Keeping that $40 figure in mind, consider the fact that JD Power estimates the cost to replace a vehicle's engine at around $4,000, not even considering the time it takes to source a replacement engine and the labor costs associated with actually installing it. Getting a new engine costs 100 times more than a typical oil change. And while I recognize this is a bit of a simplified comparison, it drives home the point that skipping cost minimal maintenance work can result in expensive consequences later on. Engines need regular oil changes to function, so why run the $4,000 risk just to save 40 bucks here and there? This same dynamic also applies to brake pads and rotor replacements. According to AutoZone, including parts and labor, brake pad replacements generally run between $115 to $270 per axle. Rotor replacements, on the other hand, typically cost more than double that at around $250 to $500 per axle. That's with parts and labor included. Not to mention that you would still need to replace the brake pads in addition to the rotors. There are countless more examples of this. So, bottom line, taking the time and investing the money to perform preventive maintenance reduces the likelihood of having to dig deep into your wallet for major replacement jobs later down the road. Now, while cost savings are obviously a major reason to be proactive instead of reactive when it comes to maintenance, there's another important reason that I'd like to highlight that has nothing at all to do with money. Simply put, reactive fleets make things unnecessarily hard on their technicians. By foregoing regular maintenance work, breakdowns occur more frequently. And when that happens, that means heavier, more complicated workloads for technicians at those reactive fleets. Additionally, having to constantly put out fires, so to speak, by turning around one desperately needed repair job after another produces a really stressful work environment. A complete lack of predictability when these technicians go into work each day can often leave them feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, or just dissatisfied with their jobs in general. With qualified technicians becoming increasingly difficult to find, technician retention should be a top priority of fleets in every field and industry. As we'll cover in just a bit, taking a proactive approach to maintenance can help create a working environment that your technicians will want to stick around in for the long haul. All right, so now that we've established how reactive and proactive fleets operate, let's dive into the steps organizations can take to get ahead of their maintenance needs. This section is going to focus on planning ahead, creating PM schedules, and getting your personnel on board with a proactive approach to maintenance. So, first things first, we need to acknowledge that proactivity requires planning ahead. From oil changes to wheel alignments and everything in between, your fleet has a litany of different maintenance needs. And to adequately address all of those varying needs, you can't go in unprepared and you can't improvise things along the way. It simply won't be efficient. What you need is a well considered plan of attack that factors in your assets' top priorities and what maintenance resources you have at your disposal. In more concrete terms, if you're a fleet looking to become proactive, you should begin by identifying the most common issues affecting your vehicles and equipment and what bandwidth your technicians have to address those issues. The easiest and most effective way for a fleet to identify its leading issues is by reviewing its inspection records and service histories. Whether you record that information on paper, in a spreadsheet, or with fleet maintenance software, taking the time to see what your technicians are working on most often is always well worth the effort. When you're reviewing that data, there's a number of things you should keep your eyes peeled for. First, look for notable outliers. These anomalies can occur in a variety of forms, such as particular issues that affect your fleet across the board um, quite frequently, or a specific model of asset that just isn't as reliable as the rest of your vehicles and equipment. By developing countermeasures for these especially common issues, you'll be able to go a long way towards being proactive in your fleet maintenance in general. Next, see if you can find any trends. For example, you might find that certain issues are largely seasonal, or that assets are more likely to suffer from a specific issue after performing a specific job. Connecting these dots might feel like detective work to a degree, but identifying the conditions that lead to issues arising can be very helpful. And finally, it's often eye-opening for fleets to determine what percentage of their service tasks are planned versus unplanned. If you discover that your ratio of planned to unplanned service work isn't where you'd like it to be, that could be a sign that you might need to make some adjustments to your current maintenance approach. Once you've thoroughly analyzed your maintenance data, it's time to start building preventive maintenance schedules. PM schedules are the cornerstone of any proactive fleet. Along with some oversight by fleet managers, PM schedules really ensure that critical maintenance work gets done on time and gets done right. When you're just starting out and you're building your first PM schedules, you should consider the following items: the number of assets that comprise your fleet's most common issues, how many technicians you have on hand, what bandwidth those technicians have to address those issues, and finally, the maintenance recommendations of the manufacturers of your vehicles and equipment. So the OEM recommended service actions. By considering all of these factors, you'll be able to develop effective PM schedules that comprehensively address the needs of your assets without overburdening your technicians. Next, let's talk about how you can get your personnel on board with becoming proactive. We'll start with your drivers. On first thought, drivers might seem kind of unrelated to maintenance, but via the inspections they perform pre and post trip, they're your first line of defense against costly breakdowns. Catching minor defects before they snowball into major issues later down the road is incredibly beneficial to your bottom line. So the more you can get your drivers invested in proactive maintenance, the better. First, one of the most effective ways to earn driver buy-in is to explain how proactivity benefits them directly. More PM results in fewer breakdowns disrupting their day. And it also means that the vehicles that they spend so much time in are going to be cleaner, safer, and more comfortable as a result of that heightened level of preventative maintenance. And just as an aside, it's worth noting that drivers are more likely to treat a well-maintained vehicle with a heightened level of care versus a vehicle that's seen better days. This is kind of a nice added bonus for shifting to a proactive maintenance approach. Next, it can be helpful to reward drivers who take inspections and safety behind the wheel really seriously. Through the use of telematics monitoring and by just analyzing your inspection data, you can identify drivers that walk the walk and not just talk the talk by avoiding any reckless behavior on the road and drivers who don't pencil whip through their inspections. Once you've identified who your top performing drivers are, consider providing some kind of incentive or reward as recognition to their commitment towards proactive maintenance and just safety in general. Finally, it's important to listen to driver feedback to show that their contributions towards proactivity are truly being valued. The more you're able to show that, the more that you're able to show that you take their concerns and suggestions seriously, the more likely your drivers will be to repay that active listening through their work. Obviously, these folks know what it's like to be in the field better than anyone. So when they feel the need to speak their mind, really take the time to understand where they're coming from. Now, let's talk about earning buy-in from your technicians. Compared to your drivers, this should be less of a hurdle because a shift to proactive maintenance benefits them more directly. That being said, for technicians used to less structure, maybe they're used to working within an ad hoc reactive maintenance approach, adapting to PM schedules still might take some getting used to. When you're rolling out PM schedules, you should explain to these technicians that with greater planning and organization, they'll be spending more days working on predictable preventative maintenance, and their days will be, by extension, probably significantly less stressful. Let them know that by becoming more proactive, they'll spend more time working on routine things like oil changes versus being constantly under the gun of urgently needed repairs. And similar to our suggestion with drivers, you should recognize your technicians whose work can be directly linked to fewer instances of repeated or unplanned service. By reviewing your service records, you should be able to identify which of your technicians have a knack for keeping assets operational without issue. And once you've identified those technicians, as with your drivers, consider providing some kind of incentive or reward to recognize them for their contributions towards your fleet. And finally, for this section, let's discuss how fleets can measure the efficacy of going from reactive to proactive. By regularly checking on certain KPIs, fleets can identify areas where their operations are excelling and aspects of their operations that could use further improvement. On-time maintenance task completion rate is a good statistic for seeing how consistent your technicians are at meeting the deadlines set in your PM schedules. If you find that this metric is not what you'd hope it to be, take a deep dive into your data to uncover why tasks are being completed later than they should be. While poor performance from individual technicians can bring this metric down, it can also stem from simply assigning too many tasks to too few technicians. Next, look into your repair priority class data. Looking into your repair priority class data can be really illuminating. Seeing what percentage of your service work is classified as scheduled, unscheduled, and emergency can clearly show if your efforts to become proactive are working or are falling short. This data can also be used to set aspirational goals for the future. Overtime spend is another really insightful metric. If you find that you're regularly paying your technicians overtime, it might be a good idea to check the consistency and quality of their work, of their PM work. At the same time, this metric can also be indicative that you may need to increase your technician headcount to adequately meet the service needs of your fleet. And finally, overall maintenance spend is the real big metric. As explained earlier in this webinar, the more preventive maintenance you perform, the fewer costly breakdowns you'll experience overall. This means that efforts you take to be more proactive should be reflected in reduced overall maintenance costs. Keep a close eye on this metric to confirm whether your efforts are working and adjust as needed going forward. And for this final portion of this webinar, we want to take a look at fleet maintenance technologies. The right software can make getting ahead of your assets' maintenance needs much easier as compared to paper or spreadsheets. So let's go through what qualities you should keep an eye out for when researching different software solutions. As mentioned earlier, your drivers and technicians play a huge part in proactive maintenance. By centralizing communications between the two onto a single platform, Fleet maintenance systems improve collaboration across your fleet operations. With FMSs, instead of having to fill out a paper form or make a call to get an issue created, drivers can report vehicle issues or asset issues in general as soon as they occur or are observed during an inspection just with their smartphone or smart device. This dramatically increases the speed at which reported issues are resolved compared to paper and spreadsheet reliant methods of fleet management. FMSs can also help fleet managers when they're creating their PM schedules. As we mentioned earlier, it's a good rule of thumb for PM schedules to be based around the maintenance recommendations of original equipment manufacturers, that's OEMs. They have more data than anyone else on how their products hold up over time. So heeding their advice on when to perform various tune-ups tends to work out well for the vast majority of fleets. That being said, actually finding these OEM recommendations often requires a decent amount of searching through the web or flipping through provided manuals. On top of that, when OEMs make changes to their recommendations based on new data they've received, fleets often are left ignorant or in the dark. They just don't hear about these changes and recommendations. Fortunately, certain FMSs pull from a database of OEM recommendations to automatically populate their suggestions within the software. This spares fleet managers the hassle of having to look up recommendations constantly themselves, saving them time and ensuring that their PM schedules follow the latest guidance. Next, let's talk about service reminders. While PM schedules are a great way to organize when service tasks are to be performed, it never hurts to have a backup system in place just to account for any human forgetfulness. This is where automated notifications come in. Many fleet maintenance solutions are capable of sending a helpful reminder to the designated users when a scheduled service task is approaching, just directly to their smart device. These completely automated heads ups ensure important PM doesn't get overlooked, even when your service bay is at its busiest. And finally, the utility of fleet maintenance software goes even further when integrations with telematics come into play. Telematics enable fleet managers to keep a watchful eye over their vehicles while they're in the field. This oversight ensures reckless driving behavior or unauthorized use and many kinds of vehicle issues never get swept under the rug or go unnoticed. For example, telematics devices can alert designated personnel when they detect that something just isn't right with a vehicle. This means that even if your drivers miss an issue during the course of their inspections, you'll still be aware of potential defects with your assets. And as we covered earlier, telematics monitoring can help you determine who among your personnel are really committed to proactive maintenance. With that established, while the data telematics provide are great just on their own, integrations with fleet maintenance software makes monitoring and analyzing that data significantly easier. When paired together, fleet maintenance software lets you see how your driver's behavior directly impacts your maintenance costs. Having all of your fleet relevant data in one place, as opposed to a telematics portal and a spreadsheet, or a telematics portal and a bunch of paper documents, having one system really provides a level of all-encompassing visibility that really can't be matched.
Yeah. And now that we've outlined some of the things that you should look for in a fleet maintenance software provider, obviously there are a lot of providers out there, but we would be doing ourselves a disservice if we didn't recommend Fleetio as the right fleet maintenance solution for your fleet. Fleetio is an end-to-end maintenance management system that checks all of the boxes that Alex just mentioned, and allowing you to connect your telematics devices to receive updated odometer readings, or to plan for maintenance needs through automatic service reminders. It just simplifies all of your fleet processes and really allows you to be a proactive fleet manager rather than reacting to items as they arrive. And so if you'd like to learn more about Fleetio, or receive a demo from a product specialist, you can go to fleetio.com. We've included the link right there for you to go to. And yeah, that's all that we had for our presentation today. Thanks for joining us. We hope that you learned some helpful tips to take your fleet maintenance from a reactive approach, tackling things as they arrive, to a more proactive approach. If you have any questions or if there's anything that we can do for you, feel free to reach out at any point. Thanks for your time.